Hey there. Hey there. It's so great to see you again. To see you again. To see you. To see you again. Today, I would love to take you through my botany journal. To go on a little journey about plants and roots and stems and trees and all that. And do a little bit of tracing of each of the constituent parts of the flora and maybe learn a little something. To be clear, I am not an expert, but I took one botany class and I'm making it everybody's problem. I'm gonna make it everybody's problem. So come on, let's dive in. I want to show you what's in my botany journal. Let's do this. So here she is. This is my botany sketchbook. Well loved, not filled quite all the way up. And I'd love to take you through just a couple of pages of it and show you some of the interesting stuff that I learned while we follow the outlines of some of the different forms and shapes of each interesting plant and some of their various names and attributes as well. So, I think we should start with some florals. I think that's interesting. In the early work, we have a lot of trees and fern unit, which I also loved. But I think we'll start here, and I have you propped up, as per usual, on some precarious item. So let's take a closer look, shall we? This is an alstroemeria. You'll see most of the names of each are going to be in these little boxes. And if it doesn't have a second name and it has SP, that stands for species. And that means that I studied sort of a generic form without getting into super specifics of that genus. This is the family Alstroemeriaceae. And down here we also have a narcissus, which its common name is the daffodil. So to focus here, I think we all know petals, which are these decorative outer parts of most flowers. And then we have the sepals, which tend to be one more outermost layer that contain the petals as well. We have the stamen, which are these long stalks here that tend to have pollen at the top of each stamen, and the pistil down below. And there's sweet nectar that collects at the base of these, and so pollinators, when they come in, are looking to access this nectar, and they get brushed with the pollen on each of the top of these stamen. And then they scurry away and carry that pollen off to wherever they're going. So there's 1, 2, 3, Here we can see a top view. It's really interesting to get different. So this is a profile view from the front, and then an aerial overhead view from the top of the narcissus. And again, you can see the stamen and the stigma, which is at the top of each. In better detail, these tepals, not to be confused with the sepals from earlier, surround the base of this particular flower, and the large bulb of the daffodil is known as the corona. Let's come back out. Here we have a couple different flowers. You can see an amaryllis, the common name of this, and here you can see the style as well as the stamen, and the petals and the sepals, so you can see the difference in the placement of those. Then, down here, we focused a little bit on the helianthus, the sunflower, and you'll notice a lot of the names might remind you of some things. So helio for sun, helianthus, sunflower, and sometimes those Latin roots will point you in different directions, and you'll be like, I wonder if that means anything. And girl, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So to come in closely on plunger pollination here for a moment, you can see a much smaller version of each tiny little sort of black seed-like structure inside of a sunflower. So this is it enlarged, smaller in comparison to these drawings, larger in comparison to real life. And then you'll see details of each, so we can see a close-up inside of each of these. And then, of course, we have the different sexes, so male and female phase. And just as with human beings, sex is not quite binary, and there's a lot of intermediary stages and flow, and it's a spectrum. And so for a lot of plants, they will go through both a male phase and a female phase. Some plants remain either male or female their whole life, or have male or all have male or female parts within the flower. But here you can see the male and the female phase. This I just want to touch on is the moth orchid. Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid. And orchids are incredibly elaborate with this lip structure here that often has an attractive smell. There is a column coated with pollen located inside, and some orchids have developed really amazing ways to attract pollinators. For example, there's an orchid where its lip structure here has developed to look like a female wasp to attract the male wasps to attempt to come and mate with the orchid. Genius. And once they attempt to mate, the top of this lip here will attach pollen to the back of the wasp, and then the wasp will leave thinking it has successfully mated and bring that pollen elsewhere to give the flower a second shot at life and to continue its genes. Very good. Let's move you out. We have a fuchsia, Alenoki, alyssum. There's a rose and tulip on this page. You can see an interior view there, and then a few views of the rose. And that brings us out of our florals until we get back into the spring ephemerals. Let's touch on a couple other plants. This is one I love, called Silamparacaris. These guys are really tricky name-wise for what it is, but I just call it skunk cabbage. That's what its common name is. And these guys look so wild in real life. I recommend you giving them a Google. And they're actually toxic. So this outermost layer is green, typically. And then as you get closer inside, it turns purple and has spots and speckles across it, and has these beautiful arching shapes to it. And then in the interior, in the center of each, sometimes you can see them and sometimes you can't, is sort of the sexual organ of the flower. And here again you can see male and female. And each of these has one tiny flower with 4 anthers. And then in the female vase, each is one tiny flower with 1 stigma. This is another view of sort of the shifting shapes. And skunk cabbage typically grows in wetlands and in sort of boggy areas that have a lot of water. Excellent. Let's continue to look. I think perhaps we should get into some trees, don't you? Here is one dried flower that I loved, and so I kept in the notebook. This gets into all of our wetland plants. So let's return to some of the earlier moments to find our trees, some common trees. Starting here, Pinus strobus. I will strobus your Pinus was the common refrain there. But this is the white pine. This was me early on playing with 30-second, 15-second, and 5-second renderings of the general movement. And this has wind-dispersed seeds, and it's a fire-dependent species, so it needs a burn. And it's pretty economically important in terms of the lumber industry. Fraxinus americana is the white ash in the Oleaceae family. It has opposite branching with large, fat twigs. You can tell they look sort of like a finger, and most twigs are much, much thinner. It has a sort of chocolate chip-looking terminal bud, and the bark is a fine diamond pattern, often dark in color. Acer platanoides is the Norway maple in the Sapindaceae family, at least in Massachusetts, where I do not live, but I went to school. It's classified as a noxious weed, and it is introduced from Europe, hence the Norway maple, and it is in the US an invasive species. It has opposite branching, which all maples do, rather than alternate branching. Looks more like this. So, opposite, alternate branching, and much thinner twigs, and a milky sap. Dicea abies is the Norway spruce, to continue with Norway, but this one is not classified as a noxious weed. It has an upward curve to the middle branches. You can see that depicted here, this upward curve. And the secondary branches are very droopy. Leaves and the needles are spiraled around the tip of each branching. Acer rubrum, red maple, again in the Sapindaceae, as all maples are. And you'll see that all maples start with the acer. Acer platanoides, Acer rubrum, Acer zaccharis, which is a sugar maple. And of course, opposite branching as all maples have, with clustered, rounded buds that are bright red color in all seasons. In the winter, you'll see buds. In the summer, you'll see leaves. And in the spring, you'll see flowers. And fall as well, you'll see leaves. And those will always be red. And here we are with Acer saccharum, our sugar maple, the Sapindaceae, our classic opposite branching, economically and ecologically important. Sugar maple produces, of course, maple syrup, highly shade tolerant, and the seeds can live dormant for 70, 80, 100 years until conditions are right. Up to 100 years, which I think is so amazing. I also have a note down here, brilliant colors in fall. Joan, my teacher, my professor, was going off about the colors. As she should. As she should. And I think perhaps we'll end here. This will be our final page. It's got two great ones on it. This is the beginning of our fern section, which I loved and enjoyed greatly. So, let's move you in close for these. Alright. So, a scouring rush horsetail is technically a fern. And you may have seen these. They come and they stick straight out of the earth. And can be anywhere from just a couple of inches to about a foot tall. They have a rough sandpapery stem that's hollow with ridges full of silicates. The stem is photosynthetic and the leaves are highly reduced and whorled at each end. It has elaters, which is when a spore is wet, they curl upward around the spore, and when it's dry, they open. And you can see the terminate end there and the variegated stripes. And again, the equisetum, high male, and equus for horse. So that's also why it's called horsetail. And then, an absolute classic is Polystigma grosmicoides, which is also known as the Christmas fern. Here you can see the larger structure, and this whole thing is just one leaf. So rather, these are not individual leaves, they're called pinnae, and this whole structure is the leaf. It's pinnate, which means once divided, and these are each individual pinnae. And then, to bring you in even closer, you can see here a slight detail of how there are clusters of powdery looking sporangy little dots on the underside of each leaf. And this is an evergreen fern, meaning that it's always blooming. It is moderately dimorphic, and the sori are these clusters it's really my pleasure to take you through this. And if you're interested, I can show you some more sometime. There's a lot more